We've got to first of all establish what we mean by moral, because we don't just mean that the consequences of free markets are good, because we start from a point that the end doesn't justify the means, that morality requires the means to be moral as well as the end. So, the fact that free markets have quite phenomenally improved the lives of billions of people, particularly since 1980, is not in itself a moral argument for free markets, but it's quite important reassurance, isn't it? That the number of people on $1 a day or less are 1 billion fewer than in 1980. It was over 50% of the world's population. It's now under 20% of the population. And what caused that was the opening up of China and India, a transformation in the lives of vast numbers of people through adoption of free market practices. But we're not allowing the ends to justify the means. So that's not a good enough defense of the morality of free markets. We need to go back further. We need to go back to the Garden of Eden. Because in the Garden of Eden there is a perfect world. There is food, there is drink, there is contentment, there is a lack of knowledge. But crucially, there is also free will. And that once you allow people to have free will, it follows that they will want to have free markets for all the reasons James has particularly set out. So the morality comes from the free will, because the only way to stop the use of free will is through an oppressive coercion. And I think that's already been set out, but it is worth reiterating that if you look at North Korea, free will is constrained to establish a perfect state, a paradise state, as the people of North Korea have tried to be persuaded that it is. But in this paradise state, although you constrain the free will of many, some, of course, still have to make the decisions about how that free will should be exercised, so they maintain their free will. So in a system that doesn't allow free markets, you are taking away freedom of choice not from everybody, but from everybody who you have under control. And the socialists, of course, always assume that they will be the ones in control, which is why they quite like it. So this is beginning to seem quite satisfactory from a free market point of view, isn't it? That the end is a very good one. And this was Margaret Thatcher's argument that you don't make the poor richer by making the rich poorer. You make everybody richer by baking bigger cakes. And then everyone has a bigger slice, but it may be a smaller percentage. But you're less worried about the percentages. You're worried about actually everybody getting a decent slice of cake in the first place. So you get the idea that it works in practice, but you also have this strong underpinning that goes with the grain of human nature. And I think this is where morality comes in, and where conservatism is fundamentally moral. You see, I think conservatives understand human nature as it is, not as it might have been hoped for in the Garden of Eden. And that's rather important, because as conservatives, and this is the point James also made, and it's a really crucial one, what we are trying to do is to allow people to lead as far as possible the lives that they want to lead without impinging on others. We are trying to allow them the maximum use of that free choice which they have as humans. Now, you may say, if you're religious, that that is a God-given right to make choices for themselves. But even if you're not, you would say that it is part of the innate condition of mankind, that ability to make choices and to want to make choices. And then you discover that in making those choices, they actually make choices that benefit everybody else. Now, what is the two commandments that we're told of by Christ, and therefore the foundation of morality? You should love the Lord thy God, and you should love thy neighbour as thyself. Now, what's so interesting is that when you get to free markets, we can leave God out of this. Don't worry, I'm not going to make a sermon. I'm just trying to draw on the moral side of it, which is obviously underpinned by our religious traditions in a country where the church is still by law established. But in that expression of love for your neighbour, doing this because your neighbour gives you something in return is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Because then you may go on to do things where there is no return. Why? Because you have the ability to do it. But in the totalitarian state, you have no ability to do these things for your neighbour because it's all controlled by somebody else. The choice is taken away from you. And that's absolutely crucial. Morality depends on the choice of right rather than wrong. It is not a question of being forced into a particular path. Free markets are a question of choosing to do things that benefit others, even if that aim to benefit others is not your primary motivation. Adam Smith's baker baking the bread not because he thinks you're all lovely people, but because he wants to make his living, but therefore he bakes you the best bread he possibly can. Why? So that you go to him rather than somebody else. So he loves his neighbour because he makes a fiver out of it, and that's perfectly acceptable. And you see that from that, you improve the condition of mankind and you have lifted billions out of poverty. So I think we follow through from a very straightforward Christian moral ethic that love of your neighbour leads you to choose the right thing to do, leads you to choose to help raise the standard of living of your neighbour, because that also helps you, leads to a better and stronger society, and that the socialist leads to North Korea. And the socialist always does. Wherever in the world socialism is tried, it always has to lead to more controls, because the truth is that if you tell people that their own labours will not benefit them, they will cease to labour. And therefore you have to stand over them with a whip to make them do things. And that is the world as it is, that's human nature as it is, and if that isn't morality, I don't know what is.